Valley and do lectures and meet with students, and it was all part of this really big package. And so that's how the two papers wound up at Grand Valley. In fact, Tom McGuane's were at Michigan State too, and wound up at Montana State, where they are now. Yes, please.
My knowledge of you comes all from reading really technical. I've come to think of when Wesley was wrong, it was then Todd. And I'm wondering if that had any resonance with you, how that came about.
Yeah, so the question was, what was your first name? Dave, that he thinks of Jim through reading and such as Zen cowboy, and how that came about. Is that right? Jim was turned on to Zen by Peter Matheson and by Gary Snyder, who he was, both knew at a very young age, not very young, but young age, in his probably late 20s, I think, when he first met Matheson and Snyder around that same time too, and both of them had a huge influence on Jim. Jim would never describe himself, I think, as a Buddhist in a meaningful sort of way, not in the same way that Matheson was, or certainly that Snyder was. And so he'd be the first, I think, to admit that. And yet, Zen had a really important influence on his life. I think, Jim suffered a lot from depression throughout his life, and he found that Zen helped him like poetry. His poetry, his writing of poetry, helped to pull him out of depressions. I think what did he say? He said he was writing to, I can't remember who he was writing to, but he said one koan, right, from Zen, one of these mind, sayings and puzzles, right, is worth 100 volume, I think, is what he said. And it's not an exact quote, but it's pretty close. It might have been 200 volume. Zen, I think he felt very comfortable with Zen, and would turn to it with more or less, more energy at different points in his life. But I think it helped to pull him out, like poetry did. And I think he really appreciated, I know we very much appreciate Peter and Gary's sort of take on life, and Zen would stay with it.
I just thought to add to that, his publisher, Copper Canyon, Sam Hamill and Tree Swenson, they really did, that was a huge core of their writers and their philosophy that governed who they would publish. And I'm sure he was very close with them.
Yeah, very much. And so Jim, a lot of publishers Jim worked with, Sam Hamill at Copper Canyon, right, and Tree Swenson, and others. So Jim would seek out sometimes, people, presses and things, and people who emphasize Zen, and those were a big influence on Jim too. I think it's right. And there were other people too, I think, who influenced Jim's Zen practice. But I think for Jim often that meant just sort of meditating, maybe koans, repeating koans, and thinking about Zen and its teachings as he did his walks and things like that. Other questions? Yeah, please.
I was wondering what your conclusion was about this legacy in American literature, and, it's like the novella or this ability to write characters. What did you come away with his place in literature?
That's such a tricky question, because I think about this a lot, and I've been asked this a lot, and legacies take time to sort of settle, right? And I don't think we're there yet. I think Jim's inevitably going to be known for his novellas as one of the great novellists in American literature. Very, very few people, if anyone, wrote as many novellas as Jim did, and with such great success. And someone who could write fiction and poetry together, collectively. When he was given the honor by blanking on the organization, but they said to Jim, the description was, not since Robert Penn Warren had anybody been so successful writing fiction and poetry together, right, in a lifetime.
Big compliment.
Huge compliment, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and which was such a great compliment, I think. But Jim, I think, wrote to somebody, and and said, well, what if you don't like Robert Penn Warren? So, oh yeah. I did get a chance to talk to Gary Snyder. Yeah, I did, and that was one of the great interviews that I'd done for the book. It was such an honor to talk to Gary and sort of have Gary reminisce. And even weirder, I was driving around the country. It was during COVID, and I'd reached out to Gary about interviewing him. And I'm driving through these sort of empty landscapes and staying in hotels. I'm the only person in the hotel, and I'm trying to write a book. And so I'm traveling around the country and doing this and that. And Gary's I'm in an email conversation with Gary, and I'm driving, and I thought before my interview I popped in an audiobook and I was listening to Dharma Bums. And Gary Snyder's the influence for Joffrey Ryder, Dharma Bums. And Kerouac just sort of idolizes Gary. And, I'd be driving and I'd pull over to Russell, I'd check my email, and Gary was emailing me, and I was like, this is a trip. I'm like, Joffrey Ryder's emailing me. I was like, this is just too wild. But, Gary had a lot of great things to say. He reminisced about Jim and he told some stories and talked about their history together, and then talked about his poetry, and it was a great interview. Yeah, and just to come back to your question, too, about his legacy, I mean, there are people out there that say that writers ultimately decide a writer's legacy, and I think if you look at the writers who still really admire and respect Jim, all of the writers who are on the back of this book, for instance, which includes Rebecca Solnit, Colin McCann, Carl Hyacin, Gretel Ehrlich, all of those people hold Jim in tremendously high regard, and that's just, Naomi Shihab Nye and so many other people have such great respect for Jim that I think his legacy's, if it's going to live on, it's going to live on. Writers are going to be a big part of that. And I think I would argue Jim's going to be remembered for his poetry. Jim thought that if he was remembered for anything, it would be for his poetry. And if you take a look at Copper Canyon's fairly recent collected poems, which is just this unbelievable, large collection of Jim's poetry, you realize just what a contribution he made to that field. Maybe wasn't as awarded and rewarded for his poetry as he should have been. I would definitely argue, but what a testament to his life's work and what he considered to be the true bones of his life. And so I think, I hope he's remembered for his fiction and poetry and everything else in between. But Jim, his poetry is a great testament. Yeah.
10 years ago, I was at my mother's in Tucson, and I was having a very vivid dream. In the dream, all these Jim Harrison books were flashing past my mind, and I was thinking, okay, I can't take a stack of books to Jim's house down in Patagonia and get him to sign, but I'm trying to decide which one I would do. And finally, I settled on the raw and the cooked. And I woke up the next morning, got the newspaper, opened it up, and Jim Harrison had died the night before. And I went, whoa. I was a little hair-raising on that. Anyway, my question is, if you were going to get one book signed by Jim Harrison, not the complete poems, that wasn't out yet, which one book would you pick?
That's okay. That's a good question. What would I pick? My first reaction's Legends, and I would have him, sign
Sure.
Legends. One of the numbered first edition collections, right? Boy, I don't know, but then, Plain sung his first collection of poetry. It would be so special to have him sign his first collection of poetry and his last, which is Dead Man's Float. But maybe Legends. Why did you pick, so I hope everybody heard the question, did they? Everybody hear? Okay. Why'd you pick The Raw and the Cooked?
I didn't. My dream did.
Your dream did. I can say I think Jim Harrison would love that. He was just absolutely fascinated by dreams and by experiences in his dreams, and came up with more than one novel's plot lines from his dreams, and certainly his poetry, and all that was so important to him that dreaming the book he wanted to sign, he would have dug that, I think, if you came up to him and told him that.
You know, I grew up a couple years in Reed City.
Oh, wow.
You know, so there's all these funny, odd connections. I've had a sauna with Gary Snyder.
Most people wouldn't admit that.
Terry Tippis Williams found my notebook that I left beside a river, and she wrote the introduction to his poem. So I have all these I think I went to a march on Washington with Hank Meyer in 1969.
Wow, you do have a lot of connections.
And I didn't know this about him bringing the collection to Grand Valley.
Wow.
I went to Michigan State.
Oh, amazing, wow.
I know, there's all these weird things happening. You know, thank you for your wonderful. I mean, I loved your book. It was just fabulous.
Thank you so much for that. It really, really means so much to me. And man, I wish you would have had the chance to tell Jim all those things. You would have gotten a kick out of all that. Wow.
Well, speaking of coincidence, I'm talking to you yesterday on the phone, and we're talking about what we're going to say today. And I said, well, you know, I got these great stories. Should I tell some of the more sketchy stories? And I'm driving by Jim's house, and my phone went dead. He's going, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Damn it, Jim. I'm trying to talk to Todd right now.
I mean, we were sitting at the wagon wheel last night chatting with a group of people, and we were talking about hauntings and ghosts, and I asked everyone, I said, where do you think Jim Harrison would haunt if he were to haunt a place in Patagonia? And everyone went, here.